Celia sunk deeper into her creaking chair. Then she shot up her head, as if stunned, perhaps holding back tears, and she pleaded with me, saying, "Please don't ever tell her that I'm related to him. It'd kill me if she knew. She'd hate me." I barely even knew who Celia was, but no matter. I smiled at her and told her I don't think she could ever hate you, and no, of course, I won't tell her, not ever. And she asked if Anna planned to return soon, but it would probably be months, maybe not until the end of the year, to visit her family over Christmas. I told her that she just missed Anna, not really knowing how to reassure a teenage girl. It probably wasn't reassuring at all. I even told her, well, if you'd come just a week earlier, you may have been able to meet her. And she said, a week ago? She stopped and processed whatever she was thinking. It seemed many things at once. She said she felt scared to return earlier after the previous summer. So I lifted my shoulders and stretched upright to make myself the size her cousin must have feared. And then I said in a big booming voice, "And you're not now?" And I smiled to let her know I was only joking, but she did not need that smile. She knew that I was only a dormouse in an ox's body. And she said, "No, not really." I shrank back into my awkward frame, and she said, I needed to come back. She was jolted by how Anna visited only a week earlier. She said I was right. She'd needed someone to just tell her if she was really seeing Anna, because she went mad not knowing if she could believe her eyes. She often returned to a place Anna worked that Anna called the Dead Tree area. Celia went there instead of my farm because she didn't think she'd ever show her face around my home again. And all year she believed she'd seen various silhouettes. But the week before, she just knew that she'd seen islands of grass in the water that could only be on a silhouette. They even had arms, and Celia saw dried mud that had to be Anna as well, but she couldn't tell anyone, or she didn't have anyone to tell. After the last summer, she stopped telling anyone about the silhouettes because it's like telling someone you just saw a ghost and they think you're nuts. I needed to talk to someone else who believes in these ghosts. And you do. Oh. So I poured her a glass of water and set it on the workbench I had turned into a dinner table. And I said, I've never really seen a teenager. You're a teenager, yeah? And she said, 14. I've never seen a teenager so interested in art, especially contemporary art. Even the art department's faculty, they're kids. I never see them attend any of the university's exhibitions, even when they're of works by their own parents. How did you become so interested? She told me about her little expeditions with her cousin, how they became something like a treasure hunt. Iowa City didn't have many things for kids her age to do. It was easy to be bored, but it was also easy to fill that boredom with things that might not be so obvious today. She said many of her friends played sports, and while she thought the sports were fun to play, she didn't want to take any of them very seriously. The outcome rarely varied. Either her team won or lost. There was no gray area, and real life was all gray areas. She didn't quite word it like that, not then. Years later, in an interview, she'd put it like that. She said there wasn't much to think about once the game ended. She preferred these treasure hunts or Anna hunts. So she said, you never know how it's going to end. There's always going to be something new. So I said, it's not necessarily art that you like. It's the treasure hunt. And she said, I guess so. Well, that's a wonderful way to appreciate art, I must say. And she said she'd tried finding books about Anna's type of art, but there weren't any. Even a librarian tried to help her, but they came up with nothing more than 2 paragraphs. So I said it would be difficult to find any books about any of the female artists from the past decade. Or any decade, really. But I said, we can see what she recently made, and I know a great deal about them. I can tell you about them. She stood at the back door before I realized she left her seat. While leaning against the open door, she said, so tell me. When we walked across the property, I told her that Anna's work, the silhouettes and other pieces, appeared to be influenced by minimalism, conceptual art, performance art, the Viennese actionists, feminism, and, of course, land art. We crunched through the fallen branches in the woods, and she asked, What is that? And I thought she meant the sounds of the forest, but she meant the terms, the artistic terms. She didn't know what any of them meant. Her readings rarely actually define such things. So I began to explain minimalism, but I stopped, realizing that I wasn't sure how to define minimalism for someone just starting high school. But then I thought, if I don't know how to define it for a 14-year-old, perhaps I don't know how to define it at all for anyone. So I stuttered, and she asked, do you know what it means? I nervously laughed, and she asked if it was minimized or really small art. And I said it wasn't necessarily small. It could actually be quite large. And then I stopped at an oak tree. I said, let's say that you draw a picture of this tree. The picture would represent the tree, yeah? And she said, I can draw a tree. Yeah, well, you can draw a tree. We would all know that it is a tree. But let's say that a logger cuts down the tree and turns it into a wooden beam. A minimalist artist might buy the wooden beam and put it in a gallery. Maybe he leans it against a wall. And this would be his artwork. It wouldn't represent anything. It wouldn't mean anything. It would just be a wooden beam leaning up against a wall. Instead of allowing any meaning into the work, the minimalist artist tries to avoid any representation. The artist tries to minimize any meaning. What you see is what you see, as Frank Stella said. So Celia thought for a moment before we continued walking. She said, but it's still wood, right? It still used to be a tree. I said, I suppose so, yeah. So she threw up her hands and said, it has to mean something then. Deforestation. Where did the artist buy it? How did he pay for it? Did he plant a tree to replace it? Oh, I said, I guess the minimalist artist doesn't want you to think about that. She said it sounded like a scam, and she pointed out how Anna's silhouettes are supposed to look like her silhouette. So she said, so they represent her, right? I thought she might be smarter than some of my own students. She said the first term was dumb, but she wanted to know the others. I, however, really do not want to explain conceptual art. Really. I said conceptual art is when the idea behind the art is more important than the final artwork. There might not even be a tangible artwork in the end. And she wanted more explanation, as she should. Okay, let's say that the artist wants to convey that they are returning to the earth, becoming one with it again. Painting and sculpture might not be a great way to signify this. Those mediums can only go so far in conveying something so meaningful without creating a large amount of distance from the viewer. Let's say that the artist instead uses gunpowder laid out in the shape of their body, and they ignite it, allowing the ash to then meld with the earth. The final artwork might not be much to look at, but the idea is fairly clear, yeah? She said that this might be more believable than minimalism. She wanted me to continue with land art, and this I happily explained, because it's fairly basic actually. It's art made with the landscape, like Robert Smithson's giant spiral of boulders in the Great Salt Lake. Or a silhouette in the grass? She asked. Yeah, she was catching on quickly. She did not need performance art defined. She said, and that must be art that's performed? That's right. And I said, feminism is, and she stopped me and said, oh, I know a lot about feminism. As if it were a subject over-taught in school. She said, there are some books on that at least. She then reminded me I'd said another term, one that sounded like a sausage, and I asked if she meant the Viennese actionists, and she corrected herself, saying they sounded more like trapeze artists. I told her they were actually a group of German artists. They did performances as well, but they stood out for the violence in their work. Some of their works could be considered self-torture. They used blood, sometimes their own. It was quite shocking. And she asked, like Anna's rape scene? How could she possibly know about rape scene? I thought she might be teaching me before we reached the silhouette. Then the two of us walked along the creek until we came upon Vulcan. A week earlier, Anna had piled up a mound of dirt, little more than a foot tall. In the center, a short silhouette had been dug out of the mound, creating the crater of a volcano. The black ash of gunpowder still filled the silhouette's crater. Tall grass wrapped one edge of the volcano's base. A fallen tree dipped into the creek behind it. Wildflowers bloomed on both sides of the water, and trees reflected in the slow moving current. and I told Celia it was truly wonderful to see it lit up. The powder was actually white. Anna's brother used a burning match to light it here, and I pointed at the foot of the silhouette, and white smoke immediately plumed from the bottom. It wafted into the air, and Anna filmed it with a Super 8 camera on a tripod standing on a dirt ledge. It captured the gunpowder burning orange and red in foot-high flames, but much of it was muted by the white smoke. Smoke that wafted across the creek in big, foggy clouds. All the while, the silhouette slowly turned from white to black, from foot to head. The black silhouette coughed out a couple more plumes of smoke, and now we have the dormant volcano you see here. Then Celia walked around Volcan, tiptoeing where the land grew narrow between the mud and the creek. She studied it for a full minute before speaking. Then, still eyeing it intently, she began to say, well, I guess it's conceptual because the idea of going back to the earth is more important than what's left here, and it's land art because she used the land to build it. It's feminist because it's her body, and it's a performance because the burning needed to be performed before it was finished. And I don't think this is like the trapeze artist, though. It's not shocking, and I'm not sold on it being minimalism. There's a lot going on here, but I'm into it. I smiled at Celia's fast analysis. But, she said, she filmed it, right? Yeah, she did. She gave me an impish little grin, knowing much better than I just how important her next question would be. So which one of your terms does film fall under?